Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. As you just heard, this webinar will be recorded. I want to thank you for joining Talent Development Secondary's webinar today, Strategies on Addressing Chronic Absenteeism. My name is Laura Wheeldryer. I'm the Chief Program Officer here at Talent Development Secondary, and I will be moderating our webinar today. Talent Development Secondary is based at Johns Hopkins University and is a whole school reform model that works with 42 schools across the United States and Guam. Our mission is to provide evidence-based models, tools, and services to secondary schools serving our most vulnerable students. And we are also the lead partner of Diplomas Now, which is a partnership between TDS, City Year, and Communities and Schools. Today's webinar, we are very fortunate to be joined by and led by our two in-house experts on chronic absenteeism, Dr. Robert Balfanz and Johann Liljengren. Let me just give you a quick bio of these two chronic absenteeism gurus, and then we'll jump right into the substance of the webinar. So Dr. Robert Balfanz is a senior research scientist and co-director at the Center for Social Organization of Schools. He's also the co-director of the Everyone Graduates Center, both at the Johns Hopkins University School of Education. Those are the research arm of Talent Development Secondary. He is often referred to as a national expert on dropout prevention and intervention because of his research, advocacy, and practice in dealing with our most challenged schools and children. He is known for being able to translate research findings into practical solutions. Bob, thanks so much for joining us. Johann Liljengren is the Division Manager for School and Student Support Services here at Talent Development Secondary. He oversees our approach to early warning systems and regularly presents all over the country at local, state, and national events on how early warning systems can be used to keep all students on track to graduation. Welcome, Johann. And with that being said, I will now turn the presentation over to Dr. Balfanz. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome, everybody. I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about what chronic absenteeism is, where we can find it, why it matters, and what we've learned schools and districts can do about it. So to begin, we're really in the middle of a shifting paradigm about attendance. It used to be the way we thought about attendance was either of average daily attendance, almost as just a bureaucratic number for how many kids were in the school on average on a given day, often used to establish funding levels for schools. And then we talked about truancy, which we sort of saw as almost a legal action. When students had a certain number of unexcused absences, and then the cases that was often ultimately turned over to the courts, and often dealt with punitive and legal solutions. Where we're moving to now is a paradigm that all absences count. It doesn't really matter if they're excused, unexcused, legal, illegal. What matters is that kids aren't in school every day because that's where they learn, and it has wide-ranging academic impacts when they're not there. And when it reaches certain levels in a school, it affects not only the kids, but the other students in the classroom as well. And there's really a movement now to using preventative strategies and positive messaging to prevent it. So to begin, really we have to ask ourselves, what is chronic absenteeism? And chronic absenteeism is essentially just missing so much school for any reason that the student is academically impacted. And we know that this happens for sure once students miss 10% of school, which is in 180 school day. That's like 18 days. That's essentially a month of school. And we can all recognize that missing a month of school can never be good. There's never really a way you can make a case that it's okay. Kids can miss a month of school and do fine, because we know that, you miss a month of school, you miss a lot of learning. And so chronic absenteeism is this idea. We take excused absences, unexcused absences, and suspensions. We're interested in total days students are missing. Once that gets up above 10%, we know we're in a place where they're going to be impacted academically, and at a high enough level, the school will as well. Now, the truth is that we really want kids to come more often than even missing just 10%. The kids that thrive are the kids that miss 5 or fewer days. So we really want to push as many of our kids to miss 5 or fewer days as possible, and as a few of our kids miss 10% or a month of school as possible. So the final thing to keep in mind is that one reason why it's really important to focus on chronic absenteeism and not average daily attendance is that average daily attendance can fool us. There's probably not a person on this phone that works in a school whose average daily attendance is not at least in the 90s. And we're hardwired to think that anything in the 90s has to be an A, right? That's a good grade. In the 90s, you're good. But the truth is you can have average daily attendance in the low 90s and have anywhere from a fifth to a quarter of your kids missing a month or more of school. Because it's different kids on different days making up that 90% average. So when we just focus on average daily attendance, we're totally missing the fact that a significant number of our kids are not attending on a regular enough basis to be able to benefit from the good teaching and learning going on. And think of it this way. We often say, hey, our attendance is decent, it's in the 90s, but we're really struggling with our literacy rate. Let's narrow focus and have a strong literacy intervention. And then sometimes after we do that for a year, we might not quite get the results we want, but what we might have missed was the kids who needed that literacy intervention the most were not there often enough to benefit from it. So again, that's why it's critical to focus on chronic absenteeism and not just average daily attendance. And, there's been study after study that you can barely find anything we care about that isn't negatively impacted by chronic absenteeism. It decreases pre-K and K impacts on school readiness. It decreases third grade reading performance. It decreases eighth grade math performance. It decreases high school graduation rates. And it decreases college and career readiness. All along students' sort of academic trajectory, chronic absenteeism puts them off track. And it wasn't actually till this summer, if you can believe it or not, that we actually got our first ever national accounting of how many kids are chronically absent. It gets back to that thing, this has been a key thing that's been right in front of us that we just haven't measured, and because we haven't measured, we haven't reacted to it in smart ways. So the Office of Civil Rights, through the data collection, all schools, including your schools, participated, and they were able to find that over 6 million kids nationwide, or about 12%, were missing 3 or more weeks of school. And this is found throughout the nation, in some places more than others. And in the next slide, we can see that, in fact, chronic absenteeism is highly concentrated in a relatively small subset of districts. So while almost every district can find a few kids that are chronically absent, it turns out that half of all the chronically absent kids in the nation are in just 4% of districts and 12% of schools. Now, some of those are just very big districts. If your district has 150,000 kids and you have a national average, even below national average, 10% chronic absenteeism rate, you might not think that's not too bad. But that translates to 15,000 kids in your district, right, who's missing a month or more of school. That's a big number. And then the other districts are really high poverty districts that have both large numbers and high concentrations of chronically absent kids. And as it turns out, in our most impacted high poverty schools, you can have a chronic absenteeism rate of 25% in elementary school, of 33% in a middle school, and as high as 50% in a high school. Imagine a high school where half the kids are missing a month or more of school. Unfortunately, too many of those schools currently exist. This is also not just an urban challenge. Turns out that rural communities actually have some of the highest rates of chronic absenteeism. They may not have that many kids that in total that are chronically absent because they are small districts, but some of the highest rates are found in our rural communities. One thing that's been, again, shown through multiple studies in multiple districts and multiple states is that chronic absenteeism actually follows what's called a U-shaped curve, we can see in this graph here. So it's quite high in pre-K and kindergarten. That's when families are getting used to school. When some may still be seeing it as daycare, it's okay to miss a day here or there. The evidence is clear that really has long-lasting impacts to be chronically absent in pre-K and K. And then we can see that it gets better through elementary school. And it turns out that it's really in 3rd and 4th grade that we have our highest rates of attendance. And then beginning in middle school, it starts to arc up again. It goes back up to 10% on average by 6th grade, climbs through the middle grades, shoots up again in 9th grade, that key transition year, and keeps going up through the high school years. And the 12th grade is also interesting because that is a combination of very disengaged kids that are or that actually will not graduate and are ultimately dropping out from the 12th grade, and lots of kids who've actually had the credits to graduate and are taking lots of days off. Senior slump is real, and as we're going to see in a minute, that still comes back to snap people later. this reinforces that really everything we sort of care about is impacted by chronic absenteeism. Another key finding is that this makes sense, is that once a student is chronically absent and we don't figure out a way to change the behavior or alter the factors that are leading to it or towards it, they often continue to be chronically absent. And if you want to see some really jaw-dropping statistics, run some data in your schools and districts on how much days of schooling students have missed over a 3 or 4 year period across all of middle school, across all of high school, across all of elementary school. You will find some kids, if you're in an area where there's significant chronic absenteeism, within that 3 or 4 period are missing a whole year of schooling. So this, it adds up. The more years you're chronically absent, the more your odds of dropping out, in this case, add up. But that would be the same for any kind of academic outcome or earlier stuff. And also that attendance has its biggest impacts on outcomes in high poverty areas because, again, there's less ways that students, through their family supports, can make up for those days missed in school through hiring tutors or learning at home or having a rich environment and where they can keep learning. So we can see here that it's really the students eligible for free lunch that we see these huge drop downs between those that have satisfactory attendance and their graduation rates. Those are not that lower than the non-eligible for lunch students and their graduation rates. So low-income kids and higher-income kids that come every day graduate close to the same rates. And then we can see for those kids that are chronically absent, the impact is almost twice as great for the low-income kids as the more upper-income kids. So even the upper-income kids see their odds of graduating dropped by 1/3. Okay. And as we said, the impacts don't go away. So we can show you that pre-K and K attendance impacts 3rd grade reading, 3rd grade attendance impacts performance in 6th grade, 6th grade attendance predicts performance in 9th grade, 9th grade attendance predicts if you'll drop out or not, and attendance in high school predicts the extent that you'll participate and keep enrolling in college. So now we're going to shift to really what we can do about this knowledge and what we know works and what schools and districts can do. So the first thing is you have to really understand why your students are chronically absent. And there's sort of 4 broad reasons, and it's really important to know how many kids you have in each of these buckets. Because if you get the diagnosis wrong, your intervention not only won't work, it could actually make it worse. I'll give you an example in a minute. So one reason students don't come is just sort of they don't quite understand the importance, they or their families. They might think that absences are only a problem if they're unexcused, that excused absences are okay, and almost all elementary absences, by the way, are excused, right? So in the elementary level, that's really a big issue, but even in middle and upper grades also. And they don't really realize that just missing 2 days a month is what leads you to being chronically absent and missing a whole month for the year. It just can really sneak up on you. The fact that a day here, a day there, you think that's okay, and you don't understand the cumulative effect. And there's also good studies that have been done that both parents and students actually underestimate how much school they missed, often by half. Because they just think, oh, it's just a day here, a day there. That can't be that much. So just making people aware of how important regular attendance is and how those little day here and day there can really add up and help people keep aware of where they are progressing towards that chronic absenteeism, that in itself, districts have found, can actually reduce this by a couple of percentage points. Another reason why folks don't come is there's something preventing them from getting to school. They have to work to help support the family. They're doing elder care, child care. There's chronic health issues that have not been treated, that can be treated, and if they were treated, the kids would be in school every day. There's poor transportation issues. Students are homeless. Another reason, though, is the kids are avoiding something in school. They're being teased or bullied. Sometimes it's silly stuff like I didn't get my assignment done and the teacher will yell at me if I didn't do it, so it's better to be absent that day than to show up without my assignment done. And then finally, there's a group of kids that have, and often these are kids that have had barriers or aversions or the myths and have missed some school, and that missing that school has put them further behind, who are just disengaged, and they just don't see the point, and they think they can get by on the 4-day-a-week plan. They show up 4 out of 5 days, they believe they'll be okay, they can pass, they can make it. They think they often do, or they think they have complex lives, and their feeling is that it's okay to come to school most of the time. We actually can show them that they're pretty bad estimates on what they need to succeed, and many of those kids who think they can pull it off don't. Okay. At the site level, it's really this core idea of measure, monitor, act. You got to measure chronic absenteeism. You got to monitor it on a regular, ongoing basis. You really want to get kids that are trending towards it. A golden moment are kids that have not been chronically absent in the past and are now trending towards it. If they keep their current rate up, they will be chronically absent. That means something recent has just happened, some change in behavior, some change in circumstances that's leading to them missing more school. It's likely a place that's easier to intervene because it hasn't sort of become ingrained or dysfunctional. It's important to recognize good attendance, just shout-outs, recognitions for improvement. Doesn't have to be stuff. Kids actually in the middle and upper grades crave social recognition. They crave recognition from adults. They may put on a tough front, but they really actually respond to it. We've been in a number of places at a number of schools where they had these ceremonies. They thought some kids might be disruptive, and the kids, often broke down or something when they got an award because some said, I've never been recognized for anything in my life. So that kind of recognition matters and impacts. It's the thing that will spur the kids to push by some of those barriers. It's important for kids that are chronically absent to really have a personalized outreach to try to form a relationship with them. Right? You can't really change a behavior or solve a problem unless you have a relationship with the student and their parents. And you have to figure out how to have the person power. And we're going to hear some good tips from Johann in a minute, how to organize that person power to build those relationships so you can understand what the root cause of their attendance is so you can get the right intervention. And many times kids will start coming just because they feel like someone will miss them when they're not there. And then this idea that as your data shows you that you have groups of kids missing for the same reason. Maybe it's a transportation issue. Maybe it's a subset are walking their siblings to an elementary school, and then it's too late for them to get to school on time, and they're trying to avoid late penalties by missing the whole day. When you find those sort of more systematic barriers that are affecting a group of kids, then you want to address it at that level and not always see it as an individual case-by-case system. Okay. Another key thing is to use this 10% definition to trigger when you're going to do something and to really do it as the year progresses. Don't wait until students have missed 18 days or 15 days to do something. Where this is going to be really important is that a number of states under the new Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA, are adopting chronic absenteeism as the fifth indicator for their school accountability system. And many of them are using number of days as cut points, like missing 15 days or missing 18 days. That's a fine sort of measure for overall progress and accountability. But if you're in one of those states, at the school or district level, you're going to want to be measuring using the 10% cut point because you're going to want to be able to head kids off at the pass way before they actually reach those 15 and 18-day thresholds. And then really finally, you want to have sort of this tiered approach, right? You want to have some good upfront prevention strategies, an engaging school climate, positive relationships with students, monitoring of chronic absenteeism, recognizing good improvement, just really making everyone get a sense that being there every day matters and they're wanted and they're missed, and having all the adults in the building understanding that this chronic absenteeism is almost like bacteria in a hospital. If left unaddressed, it pushes back against all the other good work doing. All the good teaching going on, all the good school reform going on, won't have the impacts you want if large numbers of your kids are not there on a regular basis to benefit from it. And then for those kids that have a prior history of chronic absenteeism, or despite your best prevention to become chronic absenteeism, you want to really have this personalized outreach, pairing them with mentors, a number of strategies to sort of have very targeted strategies to them. And then finally, there'll be a subset of students, often students with very high out-of-school challenges, where you're going to almost have to take a case-managed approach with partnership, often with outside agencies, so someone can actually, one-on-one try to solve that barrier that's preventing that kid from being in school on a regular basis. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to Johann, who's going to give you some really good insights on the work the Talent Development Secondary is doing to support schools in addressing chronic absenteeism.
All right. Great. Thanks, Bob. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the types of supports that we've provided to schools around chronic absenteeism. And so some of this will be specifically just around chronic absenteeism, the kind of types of things that we've done there that we've seen be impactful and helpful in addressing it. And then also I'll talk a little bit about how we've done this as part of early warning systems. So early warning systems is a broader approach that addresses attendance, behavior, and course performance. So obviously chronic absenteeism is a part of that, and so I'll share a couple of the things that we've worked on as part of that as well. So a couple of different things that we've worked on and seen be helpful in this first phase. So first one is data analysis, and we've done this both at actually at multiple levels of it. So sometimes it's at the school level. We're analyzing school and district or school trends. How do we, which particular students are flagged is kind of the first thing, but also how do we look at different trends? Are there particular grades, classes, groups of students that are struggling with attendance more than others? We have done that at the district level as well. Some of our data analysts that work with Dr. Balfanz have done some looks across districts to see, if they're similar questions, but at a step removed, and really seen that help get at some of those questions about what's driving our challenge around chronic absenteeism. So that's the first one. The second one is thinking about how do we use data review protocols or strategies to have more effective meetings and processes to support students. So in some schools this is a huge challenge. So you have a lot of students, but in any school we're always short on time, right? We always want to make better use of our time, and so we have worked on, developed a number of different protocols that just try to help school staff members have more efficient and effective meetings, to stay on track and focused on what that particular student needs or what that group of students needs, to really try to figure out the best solution, figure out what it is that student needs, and not be providing a generic solution to every student who's missing school. So that's a series of strategies. Some of those are kind of protocols or processes about how do we stay organized as adults, how do we have effective and efficient meetings. We've seen real progress in being able to make better use of time in order to talk about and discuss what students need. And then lastly is developing data tracking systems. And this one is a bit of a mix. I will say, many school district systems, student information systems, everyone has something around attendance in there. I think part of this is kind of figuring out what that student information system offers in terms of timeliness of data and ability to sort and analyze some of that. So that's kind of one side of it, and we have done some things, inside and outside of student information systems to help organize that data. And then the second one is tracking tools for intervention information. So how do we keep track of, we worked with a particular student, helping them get connected to it. How do we follow up and make sure that it's happening, that we see, do we see an impact with particular interventions that we're having? And most of that is actually outside of student information systems. There are a few that are building things in, but a lot of those we're helping schools build tools to build those tracking systems outside of that, and then trying to figure out how we track that. So another couple of things that are a little bit more on the intervention side of it. So one of them is a very basic activity, and I put up the chart there you see on the right is actually how we do this across attendance, behavior, and course performance, so across the ABCs. But just on helping schools to map out what resources, both internal and external to the school, do you have available? How do you what's there? Do we have gaps in that? Do we see these as being effective? So starting to answer some of those questions on kind of what interventions are most helpful. And some of that, depending on if they're where that goes from there really depends on what is needed. So sometimes it's designing new effective intervention strategies or looking at programs that are effective. Sometimes that is just revising what is already occurring at a school. So it depends. So And then the next one that I'll mention, and I believe it'll feed into the next slide here, but we've been involved as a part of this Success Mentors initiative as a key strategy for addressing chronic absenteeism. So it started in New York City, and now we're working with schools across the country as part of our talent development secondary work, as well as our work at the Everyone Graduate Center, to really seeing that building relationships between students and adults, having that adult advocate is a key strategy both for the engagement of that student, but also for solving problems. So when that student has a problem, they're much more likely to be able to solve it if we have that an adult advocate, someone who's able to do that. So, this started as the My Brother's Keeper Success Mentor Initiative about a year and a half ago. Was the expansion of it. It actually started as the Success Mentor Initiative in New York City, and as it expanded through My Brother's Keeper, it's now in over 30 districts across the country who are part of this. And each of these different cities has committed to a couple of different things. So, and it's all around addressing chronic absenteeism. So it's using this idea of a mentor to do this. So it's pairing every chronically absent student with a success mentor. It's holding those weekly data review meetings. It's building connections between school and youth and social service. So do we need things outside to help us address particular challenges that kids and families are facing? And then it's also the tier one proactive things that Dr. Balfanz mentioned. You know, how do we think about those whole school activities that make sure kids know that they are safe and welcome and going to be engaged when they're at our school and a part of that. So we're helping to lead that initiative and work with those different schools and those 30 districts across the country, and really see this as a positive strategy to impact chronically absent students. And then the last one that I'll mention, specifically around chronic absenteeism, is around a needs assessment. So, and this is looks at some aspects of attendance as part of this, but also digs deeper into some diagnostics of what else might be behind those absences, or some of the other things that are going on. So, trying to gauge student needs, engage adult needs. Some observations to kind of understand more of what those needs are, and then coaching facilitation support that is more similar to some of the items I mentioned previously, depending on that. But a good upfront process that we started to engage schools in to really try to get at some of those core ideas or kind of root causes for what's causing, red flags in attendance, behavior, or course performance. So that's some of the things that we've seen be helpful and what we work with schools on around chronic absenteeism. What I'll shift to for a couple more slides on it is we also know that chronic absenteeism is part of this bigger, bigger system that's working in your school. And we have done a lot of work around early warning systems. And early warning systems really based off of the idea that the same way that we see the impact of attendance on future outcomes, we've also seen that behavior, both serious behaviors as well as mild sustained misbehavior, and students' performance in their courses are very predictive of high school graduation, as well as post-secondary enrollment and persistence in post-secondary. So we have the early warning system idea is built off of these ABCs, attendance, behavior, and course performance. And we've taken a similar approach to the chronic absenteeism, is that we need to have good data on the kind of the indicator side that's reliable, valid, predictive, helps us make decisions. So how do we organize all of that that's most helpful for school staff who are able, or district staff who are able to respond directly with students and families? So how do we get the data right? And then how do we pair that with an intervention and response system? And we use that same multi-tiered approach that was mentioned earlier. And really, we're trying to talk about early warning systems as the combination of these two. It's the indicator side, kind of the data technology side, and the human response side. So how do we organize our intervention systems, our responses, in order to provide that? So we have done a fair amount of work, and you'll see aspects of it, that are similar to the absenteeism, but it's an expanded look. So how do you think about attendance So same thing, data organization and analysis, but how do you think about attendance, alongside behavior and course performance? So is attendance impacting some of your low course grades? Is behavior impacting some of your attendance? How do these things interact? And then the other aspects of it, the intervention mapping and monitoring design, intervention meetings, interventions and supports, are a similar process to the chronic absenteeism, but a broader scope to that. You're trying to address a bit of a broader scope in doing so. And then throughout all of this, so there's a couple of things, kind of the formal training topics that we usually start with for folks to help schools understand what, kind of why we're doing this, why this data is important, what we've learned about how we can impact that, and some of the things we can provide around facilitation and technical support. And our support has really ranged. We do a wide variety of different things, and schools need different things. So I think that's, we've seen that some schools, need the full-time intensive and have a full-time on-site staff member. Kind of the far right there, we need that intensive support. Sometimes it's the far other one. We're doing some basic introductory training to get ideas, and people are improving the systems they already have in place, but they are already well set up for that. They don't necessarily need a new person to run it. So we've really seen that, kind of a range of supports that we provide, and I think that's based off of what we've seen schools really need. Some are more ready to implement, this intensive process like this to support students, and some, it might take a longer period of time before they're ready to run with it. All right, so I think that's my my final one. And so, like I said, you'll see similarities obviously between the two, but I think we've seen, real benefits between, both a focus just on chronic absenteeism as a strategy, as well as built within a larger system of supports within an early warning system.
Okay, so we've reached the question and answer period of our webinar, and this is the way this is going to work. If you have a question for either Bob or Johann, please type it into the chat box, which is at the top of your screen. It's the little talk bubble. You click on that and you can type your question in, and we'll be watching for questions. We are, as I said at the beginning, recording this webinar, and all participants and registrants will get a link to the recorded webinar in case there are people you want to share this information with. You'll be able to forward them the link or use it in a team setting. So let's see, questions. Why don't I kick things off? Johann and Bob, is chronic absenteeism only an issue at high schools? I know TDS secondary works predominantly with middle and high schools. Can you talk about how this plays out across different levels of schools, whether it looks different?
Sure. So as we saw from that thing, the U-shaped chart, chronic absenteeism impacts all grade levels. In pre-KK and first grade, it can be quite high, but the difference there is that usually involves families and family issues, right? It's usually not, the kids are not deciding to go to school or not. The parents are deciding if they can get their kids to school every day. And so in those areas, it's important to have sort of a positive family outreach approach. Once you get to middle and high schools, families are still vitally important, but kids start having their own voice and their own vote. In particular, in cities where kids take mass transportation, it's very easy for their parents to see them get on the bus, and then the transfer point for the kids to go right and not left, and no one at the school it's not, there's not like one bus pulling up in front of the school where the people can make sure the kids get off. Kids are arriving from multiple vantage points through mass transportation. And then also finally by high school, in high poverty environments in particular, many of the kids are at some level, managing themselves by that point. And that's why it's very important to have that they can have a direct positive relationship with adults in the school that know them and will miss them when they're not there.
Johann, anything you wanted to add to that?
I think the one thing I would share, I think the responses is the difference, like Bob had shared. I think that's the biggest thing. I think sometimes the frustration that we run into, I think, is we, in the upper grades, I think it's right. It gets more challenging. We, in many cases, like right, students are starting to be more independent, so they're, having more independence from their family as well. So it feels more challenging in that. But I also think we've seen schools really leverage that interest. So even in places where, they're not getting support from their family to push them to be in school, students are starting to push their family and saying, yes, I need to be there, and this is why. And really, I think we've seen, not that this is, a way to not engage families in it, but when we really engage students, they can be, a big advocate for that. And, they're the ones that are saying, yes, this is important. Yes, this is why I want to be there as part of that.
Eileen wants to know if the pattern of absenteeism across grades is the same nationwide as in the Tennessee data you displayed.
Yes, we've found this very similar patterns in multiple city and multiple state analysis. There's some theme and variation based on local situations, but by and large, we see highest rates at both pre-KK and then really from 9th grade forward, but with increasing numbers throughout the middle grades. And the best attendance in 3rd and 4th grade. I guess that's when kids like school the most. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay. Bruce wants to know, or says in his experience, district administrators often focus on identifying key performance indicators and accompanying interventions. And are there such KPIs? I think yes, but we call them something else, right?
Yeah. So, and that's what I was saying is that a number of states are adopting chronic absenteeism as the 5th school performance indicator in their state accountability systems. And so the equivalent key thing to measure is what % of kids in each grade are chronically absent, and also I would say have very good attendance. You want to, as I said, do it both ways. You want to have people driving up, kids missing 5 or fewer days, and driving down, kids missing 10% or a month of school. And the thing about attendance, as you know, right, is that it's very measurable. And you can see right away if your intervention is making a difference, right? With test scores, you have to wait a whole year to know if a new intervention made a difference. With attendance, if you do something new, within a month, you should see a change in your numbers. And if your numbers haven't changed in a month, then you might want to think if that intervention is really the one that's going to make the difference.
So when I read that question about key performance indicators, Johann, I really was thinking about our early warning indicators that are broader than simply attendance or chronic absenteeism. But to me, are the real key performance indicators, to me, is just another name for leading indicators. Could you just touch briefly on the work Talent Development Secondary does with early warning indicators?
Sure. So, the idea is similar. So, you would have, you'd have an indicator for each one. So for attendance, like Bob mentioned, you're measuring, percentage of kids that are missing 10% or more of school, and the ones missing a small number as well. So it would be the same thing there. This is played out in a little bit different in different spaces, but for course performance, it's students who are failing courses for sure, and getting D's. So D's and F's are kind of our big red flags in that. And we're trying to get, how do we, we've seen that really it's kids who are able to get A's and B's are the ones who are graduating at really high rates. And again, they're going into post-secondary at higher rates as well. So same idea there, measuring that. Some folks have done for the course performance, especially at the high school level, basically an on-track measure. So like the 9th grade on-track measure, which, is course performance, but there's a particular cut point for the number of courses that you have passed. Given your graduation requirements. So that's kind of like the 9th grade on track could be your, could be your key performance indicator, for course performance. The behavior one is a little bit more challenging. We know that suspensions need to be measured, so they are important. But we're also seeing, and this is the harder one, we're also seeing that mild sustained misbehavior, is incredibly predictive of students who are in trouble. But there's not great consistency in how we measure that. So that one's a little bit harder to measure those across schools and districts, for sure across districts and states.
Thanks, Johann. We've got a couple more questions that have come in. Connie asked if you or Bob can point to examples of positive reward systems or ways to reward kids for good and excellent attendance.
Sure. So we've worked with many districts, and some have actually used, I would say, like actual tangible incentives, stuff. For certain kids at certain times that can work because those are the kids that are sort of deciding, is it worth it for me to go to school today, maybe to put up with some transportation difficulties, maybe if I'm a little bit late, getting yelled at. If there's an incentive on the other side, that can sometimes sway them. But what we found in general to be more powerful is really just the social recognition, both at an individual and a group level, which is just, as I said, like shout-outs, award ceremonies, certificates. Still works for high school kids, for improved attendance, for meeting their attendance improvement goals, because again, if a student has been missing 30, 40 days of school for a couple of years, they're not going to get to 0 right away, but if we can say, let's try to go a whole month and only miss 2 days, recognizing improvements like that, putting kids' pictures up on the wall or most improved homerooms, have homeroom competitions, but based on improvement. Then you often get kids texting their friends, where are you? We need you to get here so our homeroom can win. And then mainly it's that incentive of knowing that when they're there, someone's going to welcome them and excite to see them and will miss them if they're not there. That's the most powerful incentive of all, is that social connection with a caring adult in the building.
Johann, anything to add?
I would just reinforce the idea around I think there's a lot of systems out there that recognize or reward students, right? So I mean, from the behavior, there's a lot, right, things around positive behavior supports, things like that. I think when designing things like those and thinking about using them, it's we have to think about student motivation on that. So I was just reading something the other day. It's thinking about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? So it can't be that the only time that a student will show up is when they get that, get the ticket to the store. So it can help for some things, but if we're not also thinking about how are we trying to build that in as part of what motivates students, I think we just have to be careful on those and kind of how we're doing that. They can work for short-term things, or they might work for particular students, but sometimes it can't be reliant on only that.
I totally agree with that, and I would just throw in that, chronic absenteeism, just like anything else we talk about related to education, doesn't exist in a vacuum. So you cannot fix chronic absenteeism without taking a hard look at other elements of your school and community. So all the pizza parties in the world don't address, an unwelcoming school culture or a lack of positive relationships with adults, as Bob pointed out. So I think incentives might be part of the continuum, but they certainly are never going to fix it on their own. Okay, sorry, I had to throw in my 2 cents there. It's moderator's privilege. Yep. Patricia asked about suggestions related to staff attendance. So she mentions, let's not forget that sometimes we have to address staff and student attendance at the same time, which we have definitely seen as being very true nationally. Bob and Johann, any suggestions there about staff attendance?
Well, I really commend Patricia for bringing that up, because we often forget that kids are very observant. And if they see that a lot of their teachers or some of their teachers are missing a few days of school every month, they would think that's normative behavior. That's what you do in schools. Everyone takes a few days off. So not only is it troublesome for other reasons, but it's also just sending the wrong signal to our students. I think part of this is just awareness, again, for faculty about how important this daily attendance for everybody is, and then probably some of the same tactics, like let them really know that they're missed when they're not there, and they're very much needed and part of the school's mission. And it is one of those things that I think creeps up on us, just like student attendance does. And when we've done some of our tracking of the most struggling schools, you will then find 20, 30, 40% of your faculty missing significant amounts of time.
Yeah, I will say I know that some states have even considered faculty attendance as an indicator under their new ESSA accountability system. Johann, anything you want to add to this point?
I think the some of the similar recognition and involvement and ownership over what's happening at the school. I mean, I think that as adults, like if we feel like we're owning what's happening there, we're involved in that, we're getting recognized for our contributions to that. That it engages us more. So I think that some similar ideas, to how do we engage that. But I think to me the ownership one is the big piece of it, right? If faculty and staff see themselves as really owning what's happening and where they're trying to go.
Agreed. Eileen asked about further research on the concept of aversion. She would like to learn more. Can we point her to any resources about that?
A really rich resource is the Attendance Works website. It's an organization dedicated to improving attendance, and they have deep sort of reference material and a whole research section, which will bring you to many of the studies that we mentioned here today.
All right. Johann, anything else to add?
I think that's probably the best place to start. I mean, they're a really good place to start. So.
Bruce is asking about parent involvement strategies, and I'm going to piggyback on this because, Bob, I've heard you talk about the way schools generally interact with parents around absenteeism versus some things you have seen in research that work much more effectively.
Yep. Yeah, so many schools take sort of from a parent's point of view, almost a hectoring attitude towards kids not being there. Where was your kid? Why weren't they here? It's your responsibility. If you don't get them here soon, we'll set the court after you. A little bit of exaggeration, but not that far off in a number of places. And a number of schools have really turned this around, have really flipped it, and have taken much more of this positive, welcoming thing. When parents bring their kids in late, instead of sort of yelling at them, they're like, "We're so glad you're here. We're excited to see you. Would you like a cup of coffee? Can you tell us, are there any ways we can help you make sure that your son and daughter will get here on time tomorrow?" Again, just trying to build that positive relationship and then leveraging that relationship to try to understand root causes and then trying to solve those root causes at the most systematic level you can. And then the second thing for parents is just gentle information, I'm saying. It's like not in an accusatory way, but there's been a lot of good research done recently that just sending parents a welcoming letter saying we really, your kid in our school thrives when your student is there every day. We know you know how important this is. We just want to tell you where your kid stands, how many days they missed so far, and, what the consequences of this are. And just that clean, simple information given to parents in a non-threatening way has been shown in a number of districts to raise, attendance rates 2 or 3%, as opposed to the more standard, if your son misses 2 more days, they will then be in legal violation and X, Y, and Z will happen to you.
Isn't part of the research that parents really underestimated how many days their kids had missed?
Yes, that basically by half. And again, that's this power, a day here, a day there really adds up. Does your kid go to school every day? Yeah, pretty much. Let me think. Yeah, they just missed 1, maybe 2 days this month. That's not too bad. Not recognizing the cumulative factor that's been true for the past 5 or 6 months.
All right, so some positive relationships with adults for the adults as well as the kids, right? Johann, have you seen any really effective parent involvement strategies that you want to throw in here for our listeners?
I think those are good ones to start with. This one is, I think there are good resources more at the elementary level, I think. On those, a little bit more challenging, but I think some of the items that that Bob mentioned, I think are good, starting points for that. I think if you're just looking for strategy, just like another program out of our center actually, which I think has a little bit less in the high school space, but middle school and elementary, the National Network of Partnership Schools just compiles lists of strategies around parent engagement. So they're not all around absenteeism, so know that going in, but creative ways that the schools have used to do that. So it's a good resource if you're just looking to brainstorm ideas, especially I think in the middle grades and elementary space.
So Bruce has another question, which actually I think is well connected to this, how we opened with talking about, whether chronic absenteeism should be a state-level accountability indicator, and that it will be in a lot of places. And if that's true, Bruce wants to know, what is a realistic annual goal for reducing the rate of chronic absenteeism? That's a good question.
It is. The districts that have made really good progress have typically seen, I would say, in the order of 3 to 4 point reductions a year, but being able to do that for several years in a row. So they've been able to move their numbers from, say, 25% chronic absenteeism to 15% chronic absenteeism over, say, a 3-year period. So I think that's one good benchmark, would have sort of the best performing districts been able to do so far. Another one is just to say that, you want to try to get, a 10% reduction every year and sort of keep it going is another way to think about it.
But you've seen individual schools, for example, that have made big gains in a year, haven't you?
Yes, at the school level, right? It gets harder and harder as you go up higher up the level.
Right, sure.
But at the school level, especially if like your default strategy is that you just weren't really paying attention to this and now you're paying attention to it,
yeah.
Then you can sometimes in the order of cut your rates in half, right? By a concentrated effort that had the multi-tiers we showed in that one slide. Then you can sort of have, much more significant impacts at the school level. Then once you've got that first big piece, then to get the rest, it's probably going to be a little more in those increments of 3 or 4 points a year.
Well, so let's connect that to one more question about leveraging community partnerships. You did show those tiers, and isn't this a place where community partners could really play a role?
Absolutely, especially when you have large numbers of chronically absent kids. 50 or more in a school, let's pick a number. Certainly if you're at 100, you're not going to have enough adults in the building to form those relationships with all those chronically absent kids. And so you need to bring in outside partners, from AmeriCorps programs to sororities and fraternities to college students during work study. People have been very creative through the Success Mentor program. And there's a nationalsuccessmentor.org website is another place you can go to learn about some of those strategies. So it's a very rich role for community partners to help them help provide the person power to form those connections. So all the chronically absent kids have somebody touching them on a regular basis, building those relationships so you can understand what's going on. And then you have to create systems for those community partners be able to share at a broad level what they're learning. So when they start uncovering these patterns, and folks have used Google Docs and other means, they can be able to share back the gist of their learning. They don't have to give kid by kid details, but they can say, we've talked to a number of kids, and this seems to be a reoccurring issue.
Johann, did you want to jump in?
I don't think I have anything. I don't think I have anything additional on that one.
I guess just part of this is in recognition that schools cannot do this on their own, and that schools with particularly severe chronic absenteeism problems really will benefit from some partnerships, because getting these structures up and off the ground is no small thing, and recognizing that schools are working really hard. And often you see concentrated chronic absenteeism in schools that are struggling as a whole. So I do think, in our experience, these community partnerships are incredibly valuable. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our call, we are the lead partner in Diplomas Now, which is a partnership between Talent Development Secondary, City Year, and communities and schools. And those are the tiered partners in that. Under the umbrella of Diplomas Now, you have City Year acting as the Tier 2 partner with their AmeriCorps volunteers, and communities and schools doing individual case management as a Tier 3 approach. So you can take a look at, there's a lot of documentation of Diplomas Now and some very important evaluation materials from MDRC about the work that's been done under the umbrella of Diplomas Now. I just want to mention, if folks are not looking at the questions, that we've been dropping a few of these websites that have been mentioned as resources into the chat box. So Diplomas Now, Attendance Works, et cetera. You can find those websites as a resource in the chat box now. Bruce also wants to know if families tend to be chronically absent, or is it more about individual students, and can you talk about why that is, if there are findings about that?
No, that's another very astute point, is oftentimes if you're dealing with one chronically absent student in a family, there's another family member, maybe at a different school, but also chronically absent, or one who might soon become chronically absent if it's a thing that happens in the middle grades with that family. So it is a very important outreach strategy that when you have a chronically absent kid, to see if they have other siblings enrolled in the school system, and to sort of have a more holistic response then to that family as opposed to just doing each kid individually.
Okay, I'm going to make one last call for questions. So think about whether you have any final questions, and let me just say one more time that you will get a follow-up email if you registered or participated in today's webinar that will link you to our website where you can find a recording of this webinar, and we will post the websites that have been mentioned as resources during this Q&A session. I want to give one additional plug while you're thinking about whether you have any of those final questions for Bob and Johann, that on May 10th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, we will hold another webinar, Applying School Improvement Lessons Learned in the ESSA Era. So I hope you can join us for that. Last call. All right, thanks everybody. I know many of you are on spring break, so if you took time out of your spring break to spend it with us today, we appreciate it. Thanks so much, and we look forward to seeing you on webinars in the future. Bye-bye. Thanks, Bob and Johann.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, everyone.